You ever feel like you're trying to understand a massive global shift, but are just drowning in details?
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Looking at huge chunks of history and thinking, okay, what really mattered here?
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into something pretty specific, but hugely important. Indigenous responses to state expansion, roughly between 1750 and 1900.
Yeah, it's about seeing how all these different groups all over the world reacted when these bigger powers, empires, nations started pushing in.
And we've got some source material, some historical accounts to help us make sense of it all.
We do really fascinating stuff. And the plan is basically to pull out the main ideas, the key patterns in how people responded, make it understandable.
Okay, let's kick things off then. Why? Why so much resistance during this specific period? What were the underlying sort of currents? Our sources seem to point to a couple of big reasons.
That's right. First, there's this growing challenge to political authority. Old ways of ruling were being questioned.
How so? What was driving that?
Well, a lot of it ties back to Enlightenment ideas, actually.
Yeah.
Concepts like, individual rights, the idea that power should come from the people. These ideas were circulating.
Even within colonial systems.
Yeah, kind of ironically. They filtered through, and indigenous groups started thinking, well, wait a minute, why is this foreign power ruling us? It planted seeds of doubt about the legitimacy of it all.
Interesting. So it's partly an intellectual thing, but you said a couple of reasons. What was the other main driver?
The second big one is nationalism, a growing sense of shared identity among indigenous peoples.
Ah, okay. So sort of like we are us and they are them.
Exactly. And strangely enough, the very act of these empires imposing their culture, their language, their administration, it often backfired. It made people more aware of their own shared culture and history and fueled this desire to, rule themselves.
So the empires almost created the nationalism that resisted them.
In many ways, yes. The same forces driving European nationalism were kind of mirrored in the resistance movements elsewhere.
Okay, got it. So this mix of questioning authority and rising nationalism,
Yeah.
how did it actually play out on the ground? Our sources show people reacting in different ways, right? Let's start with the most direct approach, fighting back.
Yes, direct resistance, often armed resistance.
Right.
And a really powerful example comes from Peru, the rebellion of Tupac Amaru II.
Tupac Amaru II. Tell us about him.
Well, he was a cacique, a local indigenous leader with hereditary status, and in the late 1700s, he'd had enough of the abuses under Spanish colonial rule.
What kind of abuses?
Oh, forced labor, heavy taxes, lack of justice,
Yeah.
the usual colonial package, really. And he took this incredibly bold step. He actually arrested a Spanish colonial administrator.
Wow. That must have sent shockwaves.
It absolutely did. It was the spark that lit the fire. It turned into a massive revolt across the region.
So not just a small local thing,
Oh, no, it spread throughout Peru, even into parts of modern-day Bolivia and Argentina. It was huge.
but ultimately.
Ultimately, the Spanish forces, with their military might, crushed it. Tupac Amaru II was captured, brutally executed. It was horrific. But his rebellion is remembered as, like, the last really major Indian revolt against Spain in South America, a symbol of defiance.
Okay, moving continents and forward in time a bit, West Africa, late 19th century. Samori Touré, another case of direct resistance.
Very much so. Samori Touré was this really impressive leader who built his own empire, the Wasulu Empire. He was a skilled military strategist and administrator.
And he clashed with the French.
He did. As the French expanded their colonial reach inland, they ran right into his territory. And Samori didn't just roll over. He fought back hard.
This is the Samori Touré War, right?
Exactly. It was a prolonged conflict. He used guerrilla tactics, scorched earth policies. He really gave the French a run for their money for years.
I mean, the outcome was similar.
Unfortunately, yes. The French had, more advanced weaponry, more resources. Eventually, they captured Samori and dismantled his empire. It highlights that power imbalance we see again and again.
Right. Still in West Africa, there's another really famous resistance deeply tied to culture. The Ya Asantewaa War. The War of the Golden Stool.
Yes, the Asante Kingdom. The British had been trying to control the Gold Coast for a while, mainly for the gold, obviously. They'd fought several wars with the Asante already.
But this one was different because of the Golden Stool. What was the Golden Stool? It wasn't just a chair, was it?
Oh, absolutely not. For the Asante, the Golden Stool is sacred. It's believed to have descended from the heavens, and it embodies the soul, the unity, the very spirit of the Asante nation. It's not something anyone sits on, certainly not a foreign governor.
So when the British governor demanded it,
Huge mistake. It was seen as the ultimate insult, a strike at the heart of their identity and sovereignty.
and Ya Asantewaa stepped up.
She did. She was the queen mother of one of the Asante states. Ijizu. And there's this famous story where the Asante chiefs were hesitating, unsure if they could fight the British again, and Ya Asantewa basically shamed them, saying if the men wouldn't fight, the women would. She rallied them.
Incredible leadership.
Truly. She became the figurehead of the resistance. They fought fiercely, but again, that British military superiority. Cannons, machine guns eventually won out. The British exiled Ya Asantewa, but that war cemented her place as a national hero and symbolized Asante resistance.
Okay, one more major example of direct resistance, and this one is huge. The Sepoy Rebellion in India, 1857.
Yeah, the Indian Rebellion in 1857, a massive uprising. It started with the Sepoys' Indian soldiers serving the British East India Company.
What set it off? I know there were lots of underlying issues.
There were decades of resentment building up. British expansion, economic policies that hurt local industries, disrespect for Indian customs and rulers. It was a powder keg.
And the spark was the rifle cartridges.
That was the immediate trigger, yes. The infamous rumor that the new rifle cartridges, which soldiers had to bite open, were greased with fat from cows and pigs.
Which would offend both Hindus and Muslims.
Exactly. Sacred cows for Hindus, unclean pigs for Muslims. It was seen as a deliberate attack on their religions. It caused outrage among the sepoys in Meerut. They mutinied, and things escalated incredibly quickly.
And it spread beyond the army.
Massively. It wasn't just a military mutiny, being the widespread popular revolt in northern and central India. Princes, landowners, peasants, ordinary people joined in, trying to throw off British rule.
They had some early successes, didn't they?
They did. They captured Delhi, declared the old Mughal emperor as their leader, took other cities like Kanpur. For a while, it really looked like British rule might collapse.
But the British response was brutal.
Extremely brutal. They brought in reinforcements, fought back ruthlessly, and eventually suppressed the rebellion. The aftermath was profound.
How so?
Well, for one, it led to the end of the British East India Company's rule. The British government took direct control, the start of the British Raj.
And for India?
It left deep scars, but it also, in a way, fueled the fire of Indian nationalism. It became a rallying point, a foundational event in the long struggle for independence later on.
So that covers direct resistance quite thoroughly. But that wasn't the only way Indigenous groups responded, was it? Our sources talk about another strategy, actually creating new states, often on the edges of these expanding empires.
That's right. It's a different approach. Instead of just fighting back against the existing power, trying to build or solidify their own political structures, sometimes in areas the big empires hadn't fully controlled yet.
Like in the Balkans, with the Ottoman Empire weakening.
Exactly. The Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe, as it was sometimes called, was losing its grip on its European territories during the 19th century.
And people saw an opportunity.
Absolutely. You saw strong nationalist movements bubble up in places like Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania. People felt a shared identity, resented Ottoman rule, and wanted their own nation.
And they succeeded.
Through a series of, often bloody uprisings and wars, yes, they managed to break away and establish independent states. It completely redrew the map of southeastern Europe.
Okay, shifting focus again. What about the Sokoto Caliphate in West Africa? That was a major state, wasn't it?
A very significant one, yes. Established in the early 1800s through an Islamic reform movement, a jihad, led by Usman den Fodio. It became this huge, influential Islamic state across much of what's now northern Nigeria and neighboring areas.
It had its own government, economy.
Oh, yes, a sophisticated administration, legal system based on Islamic law, a thriving economy. Though part of that economy, it's important to note, was based on the slave trade, both internally and trans-Saharan.
But it eventually ran up against European expansion.
It did. Fast forward to the late 19th century, the scramble for Africa. And at the Berlin Conference, where European powers carved up the continent amongst themselves, the Sokoto Caliphate was designated as part of the British sphere of influence.
Even though it was an existing state.
Even though it was an existing powerful state. The British gradually moved in, faced some resistance. But by about 1903, they had effectively dismantled the Caliphate and incorporated it into their protectorate of northern Nigeria, a stark example of imperial power overriding existing polities.
Then there's the Cherokee Nation in the U.S. Their story seems different again, more about trying to adapt.
It is a fascinating and ultimately tragic case. As the United States expanded westward after independence, the Cherokee, living in the southeastern U.S., made this incredible effort to assimilate, to adopt white American ways.
How did they do that?
They developed their own written language thanks to Sequoyah, created schools, adopted a written constitution modeled on the U.S. Constitution, even established farms and owned property in the American style. They were essentially trying to say, look, we can coexist, we can be civilized according to your standards.
But it didn't work.
No. White settlers wanted their land, especially after gold was discovered in Georgia. Political pressure mounted, and despite the Cherokee winning legal cases, even in the U.S. Supreme Court.
The government pushed them out anyway.
Yes. Andrew Jackson's administration pushed through the Indian Removal Act in 1830. In 1838, 1839, the U.S. Army forcibly removed the Cherokee and other tribes from their homes and marched them west to Oklahoma.
The Trail of Tears.
The Trail of Tears. Thousands died along the way. It was devastating. And even though they reestablished their government, their schools, their courts in Oklahoma,
They still weren't left alone.
no. Continued westward pressure, the desire for land. Their autonomy was gradually eroded, their lands broken up, and eventually much of it became part of the state of Oklahoma, effectively marginalizing their own government. It shows the limits of adaptation when faced with overwhelming power and greed.
A really tough story. Finally, in this category of state creation, let's talk about the Zulu Kingdom in southern Africa.
Right. The Zulu Kingdom really emerged as a powerful centralized state in the early 19th century under Shaka Zulu.
Shaka is famous for his military innovations, right?
Exactly. He revolutionized Zulu society, militarizing it, introducing new tactics, new weapons like the short stabbing spear, the ikwa, and disciplined regiments called impis. This allowed the Zulu to expand rapidly, conquering neighbors and forging this powerful kingdom.
And this expansion itself caused disruption?
Yes, it led to a period known as the Emphikane, or the Crushing, which involved widespread warfare, displacement, and the formation of new states as people fled Zulu expansion. It reshaped the whole region.
And inevitably, they came into conflict with Europeans, specifically the British.
Yes. As British colonial ambitions grew in southern Africa in the late 1800s, conflict became almost inevitable. The British saw the powerful independent Zulu kingdom as a threat to their control.
Which led to the Anglo-Zulu War in 1879.
Correct. And famously, the Zulu inflicted a stunning defeat on the British Army at the Battle of Isandlwana early in the war. A huge shock to the British Empire.
But they couldn't sustain it.
No. Despite their bravery and initial success, the British regrouped, brought their superior firepower to bear, and eventually defeated the Zulu forces later that year. The kingdom was broken up and absorbed into the British colony of Natal, another independent state succumbing to imperial power.
Okay, so we've covered direct fighting and creating new states, but there's a third major category of response that emerges from the sources: resistance inspired by religion.
Yes, this is a really crucial dimension. Religion often provided not just solace, but also a framework for understanding what was happening, and sometimes a powerful motivation for resistance, often involving prophecies or charismatic leaders.
Like the ghost dance movement in the U.S.
Exactly. This emerged in the late 1880s, a time of terrible hardship for Native Americans who had been forced onto reservations, their way of life destroyed, the buffalo gone.
A desperate situation.
Truly desperate. And out of this came a prophecy, primarily associated with a Paiute spiritual leader named Wovoka. The core belief was that if Native Americans performed this specific ghost dance ritual, their ancestors would return, the buffalo would come back, and the white settlers would vanish. It promised a restoration of the old world.
A message of hope, then.
A powerful message of hope. And the ghost dance spread like wildfire among many tribes across the plains in the West. People desperately clung to it.
But the U.S. authorities didn't see it as just a religious ceremony.
No, they saw it as a threat. They feared it was a precursor to an uprising. This fear, this misunderstanding, led directly to the Wounded Knee Massacre in December 1890.
Tell us about that.
The U.S. Army intercepted a band of Lakota Sioux, many of whom are ghost dance practitioners, near Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. Tensions were high, a shot was fired, it's unclear by whom, and the soldiers opened fire with rifles and Hotchkiss guns on the largely unarmed Lakota men, women, and children.
A massacre.
A horrific massacre. Hundreds were killed. It effectively crushed the ghost dance movement and marked a brutal end to major Native American armed resistance on the Great Plains.
Such a tragic end. Let's move to South Africa, again, the Xhosa cattle killing movement. This also involves prophecy, but with devastating consequences.
Yes, this is one of the most heartbreaking examples. Mid-19th century, the Xhosa people were under immense pressure from the British Cape Colony. Losing land, their cattle herds were also suffering, possibly from diseases introduced by European cattle.
So, similar pressures, loss of land, livelihood, threatened.
Exactly. And in this context, a young Xhosa woman, Nonkos, had a vision. She claimed that the spirits of their ancestors told her that if the Xhosa killed all their cattle and destroyed all their crops,
Killed their own cattle.
yes, if they did this act of faith, the ancestors would return, sweep the British settlers into the sea, and replenish the land with healthy cattle and full granaries. A new world would dawn.
And people believed her.
Many did. Desperate people believed her. They started slaughtering their herds, destroying their food supplies on a massive scale, waiting for the prophecy to be fulfilled.
But it wasn't.
It wasn't. The ancestors didn't return, the British didn't leave. Instead, catastrophic famine followed. Tens of thousands of Xhosa starved to death.
How awful.
It utterly broke the back of Xhosa resistance. Their society was devastated, making it much easier for the British to take over the remaining Xhosa lands. A truly tragic result of faith colliding with desperation and colonial pressure.
Finally, let's touch on the Mahdist Wars in Sudan, another religiously inspired movement.
Yes, led by Muhammad Ahmad, an Islamic cleric in Sudan, which was then under loose Egyptian control with increasing British influence behind the scenes.
And he declared himself the Mahdi.
He did, around 1881. The Mahdi in Islamic tradition is a prophesied redeemer who will appear before the end of times. By claiming this title, Muhammad Ahmad positioned himself as a divinely guided leader destined to purify Islam and overthrow the foreign corrupt rulers.
And he found support.
He gathered a huge following in the Ansar from various Sudanese tribes who resented Egyptian taxes and administration and saw the British influence as anti-Islamic. He framed it as a jihad.
And they were successful initially.
Very successful. His forces won several victories against Egyptian and British-led troops. Their most famous victory was capturing the capital, Khartoum, in 1885, where the British General Gordon was killed. They established an independent Mahdist state across much of Sudan.
But it didn't last.
The Mahdi himself died shortly after the capture of Khartoum. His successor faced internal divisions and challenges in governing. Eventually, the British decided to reconquer Sudan, partly to avenge Gordon, partly for strategic reasons.
And they returned.
They returned in force under Lord Kitchener in the late 1890s. With overwhelming technological superiority, machine guns, gunboats, they decisively defeated the Mahdist forces at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898. Sudan then became, effectively, an Anglo-Egyptian colony.
So wrapping this all up, we've seen these three broad types of responses. Direct confrontation, like Tupac Amaru or the Sepoys, creating new states on the peripheries, like the Zulu or in the Balkans, and religiously inspired movements like the Ghost Dance or the Mahdists. It really shows the diversity of ways people tried to deal with this massive pressure of state expansion.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And pulling it back to those underlying causes we talked about at the start.
Right, the questioning of authority and the rise of nationalism.
Exactly. You see them playing out in different ways in all these examples.
Yeah.
Whether it's Tupac Amaru questioning Spanish legitimacy, or the Balkan peoples asserting their national identity, or the Mahdi rallying people under a religious banner against foreign influence. It all connects back. It shows that even when facing overwhelming power, people find ways to assert their desire for, autonomy, for self-determination.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Considering all these different reactions, these struggles. What does it tell you fundamentally about that human drive to govern oneself, to resist being dominated? And maybe, how do these echoes from history, this push and pull between power and freedom, still resonate in our world today?